Hello everyone. Welcome to this audio podcast today. This audio podcast is part of the Serology and Squil. This audio podcast is part of a Hustle and Serotype. This audio podcast is part of a Defcon premiere, and this audio podcast is part of a Storm Robotics production. In this audio podcast today, continuing on in and around IST pharmacotherapeutics and AAR. So the incidence and severity of AAR episodes amongst basimiliximab treated recipients was significantly lower than amongst the control cohort in some authored works. And some recipients had no rejection episodes in 3-year follow-up period or duration, but had agreed to a biopsy procedure for subclinical AAR. Research also had also been confirmed in and as part of some earlier works, wherein researchers looked at basiliximab treatment in randomized double-blind phase 3 clinical trials, recruiting 346 recipients. Investigators have reported that basiliximab was well tolerated with no evidence of cytotoxic hypersensitivity reactions and or idiotype antibody response. Another pertinent aspect that had not been as well documented, but at least in earlier works, but more so, in more recent research or more recent publications, was where is where in around sort of the nephrotoxicity of CNI based IST pharmacotherapeutics in transplanted recipients in context of their CNI calcineurin inhibitors based IST pharmacotherapeutics in amongst their entirety and aligned to nephrotoxicity. Again, although that being said, some earlier publications had alluded to where a CSA in around CNI calcineurin inhibitors do propagate nephrotoxicity or nephrotoxic side effects. For example, however, there had not been sort of detailed research in around looking at sort of pathways or modalities to preclude nephrotoxicity until sort of more recent, that being in the past in around the past 2 decades, more so. That draws this audio podcast to a close. The next audio podcast will look at sort of bridging healthcare disparities and inequalities through PPI, or patient and public involvement. This audio podcast now draws to a close. Audio podcast part of a Serology and Squil. This audio podcast is part of a Hustle and Serotype. This audio podcast is part of a Defcon premiere, and this audio podcast is part of a Storm Robotics production.